Have you ever watched your own mother give away the home you paid for right in front of your face? No. So imagine this. You are at your sister's lavish engagement party in New York City. Over 100 guests, including her wealthy future in-laws, are all watching and raising their glasses. Suddenly, your mother takes the microphone and proudly announces she is gifting your sister a luxury apartment as a wedding present. The only problem: it is your apartment. The one you spent 5 years paying off stolen because you trusted your parents to hold the deed. But I didn't cry or cause a scene. Instead, I smiled, walked up to the stage, and handed my mother a heavy binder. It contained 5 years of bank transfers and a direct asset freeze order from my lawyer for unjust enrichment. Before I tell you how fast the groom's family ran for the door, let me know your age in the comments, and welcome back to my channel. Please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Emma Greta. I am a 32-year-old architect living in New York City. 5 years ago, I found a distressed Brooklyn brownstone. The roof leaked. The floorboards were rotting. But I had the vision to renovate it. What I lacked was the financial standing. A failed startup venture in my 20s had left my credit severely bruised. The bank rejected my loan application. My father, Richard, stepped in with a practical solution. He offered to co-sign and hold the deed in his and my mother's names. I would pay the $3,400 monthly mortgage directly into their checking account. I drew up the architectural blueprints. I did not draw up a legal agreement. I chose family trust over a binding contract. That was a critical error. For 60 months, I sent the money on the first day of every month. I spent my weekends breathing in drywall dust. I negotiated with local contractors. I restored the original masonry with my own hands. I transformed a decaying shell into a modern home. The ground shifted beneath me when my 28-year-old sister Chloe received a diamond ring. Her fiancé was Julian Davis. He was the heir to a boutique hotel empire. The Davis family did not just possess wealth. They possessed legacy. They owned properties across 3 continents and hosted charity galas at museums. My mother Helen began acting like a stranger. I watched her spend hours practicing her posture in front of the hallway mirror before every dinner with the Davis family. At the restaurant, she would constantly adjust her sleeves to hide her lack of expensive bracelets, and she laughed a little too loudly at jokes she clearly did not understand. She was a suburban woman, trying to mimic the quiet confidence of old money and failing. Every time Julian's mother mentioned their summer estate in France, I saw Helen's hand tremble as she gripped her wine glass. She was drowning in her own sense of inferiority, and she decided that throwing my life into the fire was the only way to keep herself afloat. Helen rationalized her next move through a lens of desperate social survival. To her, I was a successful professional with a high-earning trajectory. I could easily acquire another property later. Chloe, however, needed a substantial dowry to secure her footing in high society. My mother decided my sweat equity would become Chloe's wedding gift. The betrayal did not begin with a shouting match. It began in silence. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my drafting table, reviewing client proposals. My phone buzzed with an automated text message. A real estate appraiser was requesting entry to the Greta family property on Thursday morning to finalize a valuation. My heart hammered against my ribs, and for a moment I could not breathe. I stared at the text message until the words blurred into meaningless gray shapes. I did not throw my phone. I sat in my office chair and felt a cold, hollow ache spread from my chest to my fingertips. I tried to stand up, but my knees buckled, and I had to grip the edge of the drafting table to keep from collapsing on the floor. I let out one single jagged breath that sounded like a sob, but I refused to let the tears fall. I waited for the shaking to stop. I waited until my face felt like a mask of stone. Only then did I close my laptop, put on my coat, and dial the county clerk. I assumed a lawyer could fix it in a day. I thought I would hand over my bank records, and a judge would issue a swift correction. I was naive. I sat in a stark midtown office on a Thursday morning. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, but the room felt suffocating. My attorney David sat across from a wide mahogany desk. He did not offer false hope. He did not sugarcoat the uphill battle. He looked at the printed county property records and folded his hands. "Emma, their names are on the deed," he said. His voice was flat. "Legally, it is their house. You handed them an asset. The law does not care about family promises. It cares about ink on paper." I felt the heat leave my face. The reality settled over me. If I called the police, they would label it a civil dispute and walk away. To fight this, I had to prove a legal concept called unjust enrichment. I had to convince a judge to establish a constructive trust. David explained this meant proving my parents were holding the property unfairly and that I had made every financial contribution since the purchase date. It required an overwhelming burden of proof. I had to account for every dollar, every nail, and every hour of labor I had poured into that building. David asked why I had not insisted on a formal contract 5 years ago. The answer was humiliating but simple. A failed startup in my 20s had wrecked my credit, and my parents had bailed me out of a massive loan. Even though I paid them back in full, I still felt indebted to their kindness. So when this brownstone opportunity arose, and my father offered to hold the deed to bypass the bank, I trusted him completely. I mistook his financial control for fatherly protection. The next morning, my dining table became a war room. The architectural firm where I worked immediately noticed my decline. I missed a deadline for a commercial zoning permit. My boss pulled me aside to ask if I was sleeping. I said I was fine. I went home and drank cold coffee while scrolling through 5 years of digital archives. The process was grueling. It was deeply humiliating to dissect my own life, to prove I owned what was mine. I printed bank transfers showing $3,400 leaving my account on the 1st of every month. I tracked down the roofer who fixed the leak in 2021. I found the invoice for the custom oak cabinets I had installed myself. I compiled text messages where my father acknowledged receiving the mortgage money. I pulled statements showing I paid the annual property taxes directly to the city. The stack of paper grew 3 inches thick. Between the mortgage, the renovations, and the property taxes, the total sum of my contributions exceeded $294,000. It was the physical manifestation of my 30s. I was not just fighting for a building. I was fighting for my financial independence. Before filing the lawsuit, I made one attempt at diplomacy. I hoped reason still existed in my family. I drove to my parents' suburban home on a Sunday afternoon. My mother was at a bridal fitting with Chloe. My father, Richard, was in the driveway washing his sedan. He was a retired actuary. He was a man who measured his life in risk assessment and cold numbers. I walked up the driveway holding a single folder. I showed him the spreadsheet of my payments. I asked him to explain the appraisal text message I had received. Richard stopped wiping the windshield. He kept his back to me, staring intently at a tiny spot of dirt on the hood. He looked at the sponge in his hand, as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Don't be selfish, Emma," he murmured without turning around. The water from the hose ran over his expensive leather shoes, but he did not seem to notice. He was a man who calculated risks for a living, and he had decided my happiness was an acceptable loss for a higher social dividend. He explained their logic with chilling calmness. "Julian's family is traditional. They expect Chloe to bring something substantial to the marriage. You are established. You are a senior architect. You will recover from this. Chloe needs this foundation." He spoke as if he were reallocating funds in a mutual fund portfolio, not stealing his oldest daughter's home. He truly believed they were making a strategic sacrifice for the greater good of the family name. "You have always been the capable one," he added. It was the exact phrase they used when I was a teenager paying for my own college applications while they bought Chloe a car. Being capable was my punishment. I took the folder back. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I turned around and walked to my car. The collateral damage soon spread to my personal life. The emotional toll began to fracture my own relationship. My fiancé Mark was a corporate consultant. He liked order. He liked predictable weekends and quiet evenings. When I told him I was suing my parents for fraud, he paced our living room. He asked how much it would cost and how long it would take. I told him legal fees would drain my savings, and the process could take a year. He looked at the boxes of legal documents stacked near our sofa. Emma, I cannot be dragged into a messy family litigation right now, he said. I am up for partner at my firm. I need peace at home. He asked for a break. He packed a duffel bag and went to stay at a hotel downtown. He chose convenience over partnership. I did not beg him to stay. I watched the door click shut. I was entirely alone. I had no partner. I had no family. I only had the receipts. I had 3 weeks before the engagement party. 3 weeks before my mother planned to stand in front of the New York elite and hand over the keys to a house she did not own. David told me filing the lawsuit was just step one. To actually freeze the asset before the party, we needed an emergency temporary restraining order, or TRO. A TRO is a direct mandate from a judge. Once granted, it makes it legally impossible to sell, transfer, or gift the property. Getting a judge to grant a TRO requires an airtight petition and the immediate filing of the lawsuit itself. I stopped sleeping. I finalized the exhibits. I signed the sworn affidavit, officially suing my own parents. The judge signed the emergency order on Friday. The clock was ticking down to a Saturday night. I was walking into a war they did not know had already begun. The engagement party took place on the top floor of a private Manhattan venue overlooking Central Park. The space was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline under a clear night sky. Thousands of white orchids spilled over crystal vases on every table. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The room buzzed with the quiet arrogance of Julian's relatives. They were people who did not buy furniture. They inherited it. They wore understated garments that cost more than a reliable car. They spoke in low murmurs about trust funds and corporate mergers. I stood near the mahogany bar at the back of the room. I held a navy blue binder against my chest. A bartender in a white jacket offered me a flute of champagne. I shook my head. I needed my mind sharp. I watched my sister, Chloe, float between groups of guests. She wore a silk gown that dragged elegantly across the polished hardwood. Chloe had never worked a 40-hour week in her life. She studied art history for 6 years and spent her 20s curating a social media feed. Her talent was making other people believe she was important. Tonight was her masterpiece. Julian's father, Harrison Davis, stood near the center of the room. Harrison was not a man who smiled easily. He built his boutique hotel empire by identifying risks and eliminating them before they cost him money. He had a reputation for auditing his own executives without warning. He held a glass of scotch and watched my parents with a calculating gaze. He was evaluating their worth. My mother Helen knew this. She spent the entire evening trailing Harrison. She laughed too loudly at his brief remarks. She adjusted her posture whenever he glanced in her direction. She was auditioning for his approval. My father, Richard, stood by the window holding a club soda. He looked exhausted. He wore a rented tuxedo that did not fit him properly across the shoulders. He kept checking his watch. He knew what was going to happen. He knew the theft he had authorized. But he chose to play his role. He was the passive enabler, allowing his wife to rewrite reality to secure their younger daughter a wealthy husband. He avoided looking in my direction. At exactly 9:15, the string quartet stopped playing. Helen tapped a silver spoon against her crystal glass. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the low hum of conversation. The room shifted its attention to the front stage. Helen walked up the short steps to the microphone. Her hands gripped the sides of the acrylic podium. She looked out over the crowd of 100 guests. She made sure to lock eyes with Harrison before she spoke. Family is about legacy, she began. Her voice echoed through the speakers. She spoke about building a foundation for the next generation. She used words like heritage and roots. She crafted a narrative of a hardworking family passing down success to ensure their children thrived. It was a beautiful speech. It was entirely fictional. She spoke about late nights and sacrifice, taking credit for the calluses on my hands and the empty spaces in my bank account. Julian and Chloe, she continued, turning toward the couple. Marriage requires a solid place to grow. Richard and I want to give you something more than just our blessing. We want to give you a piece of our family history. As your wedding gift, we are transferring the deed to our fully renovated Brooklyn brownstone into your names. A polite ripple of applause swept through the room. Harrison nodded slowly, a gesture of genuine approval. A Manhattan property was a respectable dowry. It signaled financial stability. It proved we were not just middle-class climbers seeking a handout. Chloe pressed her hands over her mouth. She feigned breathless surprise. She hugged Julian tightly while the photographer captured the moment. The illusion was flawless. I did not scream. I did not throw my binder. I did not knock over a tray of drinks. Emotion is a liability in a room full of strategists. I stepped away from the bar. My heels clicked in a steady rhythm against the hardwood floor. The crowd parted naturally as I walked down the center aisle. I kept my eyes fixed on the podium. Richard saw me moving. He took a step forward and then froze. He looked down at the floor. He lacked the courage to intervene. He would not stop his wife, but he would not stop me either. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. Helen saw me approach. Her triumphant smile did not vanish, but the muscles in her face tightened. Her eyes darted toward Harrison and then back to me. She leaned in as I stood beside her. "Do not make a scene," she hissed under her breath. Her tone was venomous, but her teeth remained gritted in a fake smile for the audience. She expected me to shrink. She expected the weight of the social setting to force me into compliance. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I set the heavy navy blue binder onto the acrylic podium right over her speech notes. I flipped it open to the first tab. I adjusted the microphone down to my level. "You cannot gift an asset currently under a court-ordered title freeze, Mom," I said. My voice was calm. I spoke barely above a whisper, but the acoustic setup caught every syllable. The words bounced off the glass windows and settled over the crowd. "I paid nearly $300,000 over 5 years," I continued. I slid the top document from the binder across the podium. It was a certified copy of a temporary restraining order signed by a judge. I drew the architectural plans. I paid the contractors. I transferred the mortgage payments to your account every 30 days. That building is frozen evidence in an active fraud lawsuit. It is not yours to give. The applause died instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses nearby. 100 guests stopped moving. The photographer lowered his camera. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to crime scene. Helen stared at the stamped document. Her hands began to shake. The color drained from her neck up to her cheeks. She looked out at the audience and then turned to me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The curated image he had spent months building shattered in 10 seconds. There was no spin she could apply to a legal injunction. Chloe dropped her hands from her face. The theatrical joy vanished. She looked at Julian. Julian looked confused. He turned toward his parents for guidance. Harrison Davis did not look confused. He looked at the binder. He heard the exact phrasing I used. A man who spent his life avoiding financial liabilities recognized a toxic asset immediately. He did not ask questions. He did not approach the stage to defend my mother. He understood that his son was about to be implicated in receiving stolen property. Harrison set his scotch down on a passing waiter's tray. He walked directly over to Julian. He gripped his son's shoulder tightly. "We are leaving," he said quietly. His voice carried across the silent room. Julian hesitated. "Dad, we cannot just leave. We just announced the engagement." Harrison did not negotiate. He did not care about the cake or the photographs. He cared about exposure. "Do not argue with me, Julian," he instructed. "Walk to the elevator right now." Harrison turned his back on my family. He walked toward the exit. His wife followed him without a backward glance. The groom looked at Chloe, looked at the stage, and then turned and followed his parents out the door. The dominoes had fallen. The engagement party was over. The room began to empty as the other guests realized the social execution they had just witnessed. Helen stood frozen at the podium, clutching a microphone that was no longer transmitting to anyone who cared. The public reckoning was complete, but the battle to regain my actual property was only just beginning. There was no sudden tearful apology the next morning. My phone did not ring. The Davis family did not cancel the wedding outright. Wealthy families like theirs rarely make abrupt emotional decisions. They make calculated adjustments. Harrison Davis instructed his corporate attorneys to draft a prenuptial agreement. It was a brutal, uncompromising document. It classified my sister as a financial liability rather than an equal partner. The contract stipulated that Chloe would waive all rights to spousal support in the event of a divorce. It demanded a strict separation of existing and future assets. It even dictated a capped payout based on the number of years they remained married. Helen was forced to sit in a polished conference room and review the paperwork with Chloe. Her humiliation was profound. She had tried to buy her way into high society, and instead she handed them the leverage to treat her daughter like an unvetted acquisition. The dynamic between Chloe and her future in-laws was permanently fractured before she ever walked down the aisle. She became a dependent on a tight allowance rather than a respected member of their clan. I did not wake up the next day with a deed to my home. The engagement party was merely a tactical strike. The actual war took place in windowless deposition rooms and endless email threads. Civil litigation is a slow grinding machine designed to test your endurance. My parents hired a defense attorney who specialized in stalling tactics. They filed frivolous motions to dismiss. They requested continuous extensions. They hoped my financial resources would dry up before we reached a judge. They knew I was paying my lawyer a heavy retainer. Every email David sent cost me $300. Every hour we sat in mediation drained my savings account. Over 8 grueling months, I spent $43,000 in legal fees. I drained my retirement fund. I sold my car and started taking the subway to the architectural firm. I canceled every subscription. I ate cheap meals and stopped buying anything that did not keep the lights on. My father, Richard, understood math better than he understood morality. He was running a probability model. He figured the expense of fighting would eventually outweigh my desire to win. He underestimated my capacity for suffering. I was willing to lose almost everything to prevent them from taking what was mine. The turning point arrived when David filed a motion to place the lawsuit on the public trial docket. A private dispute is easy to ignore. A public fraud trial is a permanent stain. If we went to open court, every piece of evidence would become public record. The bank transfers, the text messages, the false appraisal. Local journalists cover county civil disputes. The transcripts would be searchable online forever. Helen realized that her friends at the country club would read the details. Harrison Davis would certainly have his assistants monitor the proceedings. Chloe's new social circle would know exactly how her parents operated. Their carefully curated image would be dismantled piece by piece in front of a jury. My parents agreed to a final settlement conference 2 weeks before the trial date. We met in a neutral mediation center downtown. The room was cold. The walls were painted a sterile beige. I sat on one side of a long synthetic wood table with David. My mother and father sat opposite us. They looked significantly older. The stress of maintaining their facade had carved deep lines into Helen's face. Richard refused to make eye contact. He stared at a yellow legal pad the entire time. There was no negotiation left to perform. The leverage was insurmountable. David slid the quitclaim deed across the table. It required their signatures to formally relinquish all claims to the Brooklyn property and transfer ownership solely to me. A notary public stood quietly in the corner, waiting to stamp the paper. Helen picked up a black pen. Her hand trembled slightly. She did not look at me when she signed her name. Richard signed next. The scratching sound of the pen against the paper was the only noise in the room. They handed the document back to the mediator. They surrendered the asset to protect their social reputation. They did not apologize. They did not express regret. They packed their briefcases and walked out of the room. I watched the heavy wooden door close behind them. I won my home. I reclaimed the structure I built. But the victory required a severe toll. My former fiancé, Mark, never returned. He married a woman from his consulting firm a year later. I haven't spoken to my parents or my sister in 2 years. I did not attend Chloe's wedding. I saw photos online. She wore a custom designer dress and smiled next to Julian. The pictures looked flawless. I knew the reality behind the camera. She was married to a man whose family trusted her so little they mapped out her exit strategy before she even signed the marriage license. The day the deed transfer became official, Richard sent me one final text message. He wrote, "You broke your family over money." He still believes I am the villain. He believes my refusal to be robbed was an act of aggression. I did not reply to his message. I took a screenshot of the words and saved it to a secure folder on my laptop. I keep it to remind myself that their love was always conditional. It was a transaction disguised as affection. They loved my utility, not my humanity. I am sitting in the living room I fought to keep. The afternoon sun hits the custom oak cabinets I installed myself. The floorboards do not creak anymore. The space is quiet. It is lonely sometimes. The silence can feel heavy on Sunday mornings when the neighborhood is still. But the walls belong to me. The foundation is solid. I learned the hardest lesson a person can absorb. Family is not determined by blood or shared last names. Family is defined by the people who do not steal your foundation when you turn your back. Drop a comment if you have ever had to pay the ultimate price for your peace, and subscribe for more.